Hello everyone. So this is the first video lecture on the chapter on middle childhood. Middle childhood is the period between 6, so it's about first grade, and 12 years old. So we're looking at, I guess, 6th grade before we hit puberty. So it's like after toddlerhood, after preschool, before we hit puberty. So this is a period and these lectures will be in the same order. We'll talk about physical, cognitive, and then social. So when we talk about physical development, we're talking about how the brain is changing and the brain structure. The brain has reached about its full weight by about age 7. So this is a period where the brain is the full size. We've got the process continues of myelinization, and you'll probably remember that myelinization is where the neurons are covered in fat, and the purpose or the outcome of myelinization is the signals transfer faster. So the myelinization improves processing speed and reaction time, so kids are thinking faster. The hippocampus, this is the region of the brain that's implicated in like new brain cells and memory. So we see our children's brains, our middle childhood brain is better with short-term memory, and with processing short-term memory, it means more is going to long-term memory. You'll remember in the last chapter we talked a little bit about episodic memory, and episodic memory are the memories of the self. So our memories are developing, we're thinking more quickly, we're also growing, our bodies are growing, not as fast as they did in the previous stage of development, but now we've moved into the stage of slow and steady growth. And this is a period of what we call long bone growth. So that would be like the leg bones, and this may result in growing pains. I'm sure you've heard kids, or maybe even you remember your own growing pains, and the growing pains are associated with the ligaments. I remember my husband talking about when his brother would grow like a foot in a year, and it would cause him so much pain. So obviously we need to be thinking about nutrition, right? Nutrition as our bodies are changing and growing quickly. The textbook suggests that of course, nutrition and the calories that a person needs, that a child needs, they're going to need a lot because their bodies are taking a lot of energy. But there's also going to be some relevance to physical activity and the muscle mass. So if boys are gaining more muscle mass, so your textbook says that girls need about 14 to 18 calories a day, 1800, and boys are about 16 to 2000 calories a day. There's also a brief discussion about the difference between macronutrients and micronutrients. So your macronutrient group would be your proteins, your carbs, your fats. Your micronutrients are your vitamins and your minerals and your specific vitamins and minerals. Some families, some children at this point may start to be thinking about non-meat diets. And so there's a brief discussion in your textbook about the different kinds of non-meat diets. The Ovia, honestly, I didn't know that I knew these were different, and I guess I just hadn't bothered to look at the names of them. But you might, the options would be a vegetarian diet that only consumes eggs, or you might have a primarily vegetarian diet that has eggs and dairy, or you might have a lacto-vegetarian, which is dairy, or you might choose to be vegan. And there's really the one that I notice is not on here is the pescatarian, is the one that eats fish. It's not mentioned. But if we choose, or maybe if the adults are already living a lifestyle like this, of course we must consider that it's important that we provide all of the necessary nutrients like the proteins and the iron and the calcium and the vitamin Bs, which these things can be gleaned from non-meat sources too. There's a brief discussion in the book, for instance, about almond milk, or oat milk, legumes, nuts. These things can be gleaned from other sort of nutrient groups. I don't consider myself a vegetarian, but I don't really like to eat meat, and I would probably fall into the lacto-ovia vegetarian group. Like I'll eat eggs and dairy, but if I'm given a choice, I would just assume not have meat if I have a choice. But some families might be choosing this at this time. So then we need to talk about the role of, or the significant, or the phenomena of malnutrition. There's quite an extensive discussion in our textbook about the relationship between, not the relationship, but malnutrition and obesity. So malnutrition is not necessarily hunger. Of course, a child who is hungry will be suffering from malnutrition, but it's also possible that you can have access to food, but the food was not meaningful or is not nutrient dense. So we can be malnourished with lots of food available, just junk food. So because the phenomena of actual hunger is less common in our culture because we have so much low nutrient food, sometimes we'll hear phrases like food insecure. And so your textbook has a brief little section in there about food insecure without hunger, food insecure with hunger. But it basically means that a family or a household is not is not secure in knowing where their next food is going to come from, or that their food is not a quality, nutrient dense food. The National School Lunch Program actually was introduced, I want to say, in the 1960s as a way to, I believe it was part of the War on Poverty under President Johnson, as a way to remedy childhood hunger. What is interesting, though, is how the different school districts have significant influence in what is made available to the school lunch program. I think I'm going to create a little activity and invite you to learn a little bit about the school lunch program in the school district that you happen to be in. But that was the purpose of it. The purpose of the school lunch program under President Obama, I don't know. So under Ronald Reagan, when I was coming of age, ketchup became an acceptable vegetable that could be in a school lunch program. Under President Obama, Michelle led a program to improve the school lunch program, and we saw a lot more things like fresh fruits and vegetables, and a lot of the staples that children had grown accustomed to, like pizza and Pop-Tarts, were eliminated from the school lunch. There was a lot of pushback against this because school districts were throwing so much food away, and the food that was being mandated by the federal government was so much more expensive, and then the kids weren't eating it. The point being is that the school lunch program has a lot of politics involved, but the idea of the school lunch program was to provide nutrient-rich food for children at school. And then there was a movement during COVID to make the school lunch available for free for all children. Anyway, but that was the point. The point was to make nutrient-rich food available for poor kids. There's another discussion in this chapter about food allergies. We've talked about this in a previous chapter. You have over here a picture of the big 9 of the food allergies, and we make reference again to anaphylaxis, which is a life-threatening sudden reaction. Food allergies are specifically the immune response to a particular food. Food intolerance, though, is distinctive in that this may be an unpleasant symptom after consumption for probably a similar immune response, but a true food allergy can be life-threatening for some people. And then there's an extensive discussion about the role of obesity. One thing that's raised in this chapter that was new to me is this idea right here of oblivia. I think that's obesity. It's, I suppose, the word of being oblivious and obesity put together, and it's the idea that parents and children are not aware of the degree, or they don't recognize that their children or even themselves are obese until they are, I think it's something like 97, like the 97th percentile, before we recognize that we're obese. And this simply speaks to the lack of awareness of what obesity, of what the measure of obesity and the measure of overweight is, and probably to the cultural phenomena that so many Americans and so many children are overweight. We don't recognize they're overweight. Of course, as I start talking about the phenomena of being overweight and obesity, I'm also reminded of sort of a cultural awareness of what we might call body shaming. And so this is a fine balance between what the healthy body should look like and what an an overweight body should look like. And I am not at all advocating for a diet culture. Matter of fact, your textbook even says dieting should be avoided. We should not be food shaming people. We certainly should not be putting our children on diets, but we should be an active. There's a difference between being a big person and carrying around more weight than your BMI, which we know your BMI is a calculation of your height and your weight, and textbook and study after study says it's not necessarily a good measure. It just happens to be the measure we use. So please do not misunderstand. I am not suggesting that there is inherently anything, and I don't think your book is saying this either, that there's inherently anything wrong with being over a certain body weight. The question is it a healthy body weight, and is that person's body, and is that person healthy? The same thing could be said for being underweight and not being a physically active and being healthy. You can also be an unhealthy, small, skinny person too. That's sort of the point. But that's sort of raised in here. And of course, we can't ignore the fact that our culture has increasingly become a sedentary culture, which means we spend more time sitting, we spend more time riding in cars, we don't ride bicycles, we don't walk as much as previous generations, and the readily available food that is not whole food, that is high fat, that is not necessarily good for you food. Okay, I have reached my 10 minutes, so I'm going to wrap up this first video right here. And when I come back, I want to talk about recess and asthma.